The following program is being brought to you by the Emerge Network. It's time to take a look inside of the ring with in-depth interviews with the men and women who go into battle between the ropes. It's Indie Talk with Casey Johnson.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another edition of Indie Talk here on the Emerge Wrestling Podcast Network. I am your host, as always, Casey Johnson, and you know the idea here. We want to talk to the greatest names, some of the most important people, at least in our mind, in indie wrestling, and get some insight into their thoughts on the business, everything that they do, and it's going to be absolutely fantastic. Of course, we don't work with just Emerge wrestlers. Recently, I had Gregory Iron on there before the Downtown show, and last episode was Stuka Jr. from CMLL, but we have an interesting corollary to Emerge with our guest today. Any Emerge fan will know the names of Trip Cassidy, Remy Wilkins, Trevor Court, Dale Patricks, Joe Pittman, Percy Davis, Sage Phillips, Luke Lawson, Mance Warner, Alistair Wilde, and all of these men share one thing in common, and that is my guest today, the King of Indiana himself, the instructor at the School of Roc, Mr. Billy Roc. How are you doing today, man?
I'm doing really awesome. Thank you for having me on the show.
Oh, no, definitely. Thank you for being here. So we want to talk a little bit about your career and especially the School of Roc, and I've been informed that you'll be wrapping up soon, so I want to take advantage and talk to you a little bit about that too. But one thing that I want to point out first is something that is actually pretty important to me, which is I have about 4 wrestling shows that I went to in my life that I consider my first wrestling show. There was one in 2006 in Columbus that I went to. It was a one-off. And then there was one in 2008 that I went to that became the consistent promotion I went to in my hometown that I also sort of consider my first since it was that promotion. And SummerSlam 2008 was my first WWE show, but there was a gem of a show hidden in there on April 14th, 2007. It was at Shelbyville High School in Shelbyville, Indiana, and it was the show that absolutely got me hooked on the idea that indie wrestling was legit and that I wanted to find out more about it. And you, Mr. Billy Roc, were actually on one of the first shows that I ever went to. You and Tony Kozina faced the Iron Saints in IWA Mid-South that night. So this is a really interesting opportunity for me to get to interview one of the guys who sort of influenced my love for the industry with this event.
Oh, that's pretty cool. Yeah, I actually remember that show. I didn't remember the date, but I definitely remember that show.
Yeah, I the only reason that I know the date is I've watched the DVD over so many times, and the voice of their play-by-play going, "It is April 14th, 2007." I'll always remember that. But I actually rewatched that match earlier today to sort of get ready for this, and I'm there in the front row, and you gave me a high five. It was pretty cool.
Yeah, it was kind of a big match for me because for me, when I broke into the business, Tony Kozina was one of the names that I would read out of PWI magazine.
Right.
And so for me to team up with him, it was an honor for me, just because it's one of those full circle kind of moments you have where, you know, I don't let Tony Kozina know, hey man, I used to look at you in PWI magazine. This is so cool. I didn't do that, but in my head, I was thinking that. So. Yeah,
for sure. And of course, the Iron Saints cut a fantastic heel promo before the matchup about the fire hydrants in Shelbyville, so that was excellent. The whole promo is, why do you guys have yellow fire hydrants? And I thought at the time, like, man, they're getting some serious heat, and looking back on it now, I kind of question it. But Before we sort of get into your story in the business, I like to try to start each one of these, if I can, with a bit of a current question. When I interviewed Gregory Iron, that was when the whole final deletion thing had just happened. As we're recording this, last night, Kevin Owens, who is a guy who slaved away on the Indies for a long, long time, became the Universal Champion on Raw, and terrible name for the belt, as some believe aside. A lot of people are calling this a real victory for indie wrestling overall. He was a guy that he's good, but he'll never get to WWE because of who he is. What are your thoughts on sort of the position that Owens is in right now? And of course, you're seeing it across the board, but what this sort of means for indie wrestling, because it's popping up more and more, I think, on WWE television now. They're talking about it more and more. It's even becoming involved with the angle that Miz is doing right now with Daniel Bryan. So what do you think that says to the business of indie wrestling as somebody who's been around for a while?
Well, I think, in all honesty, I believe that the true trailblazer of that all kind of started with CM Punk.
True.
And then from there, he was like Mr. Indie there for a while. Then, of course, then Daniel Bryan, and then Seth Rollins, and now we have Kevin Owens. And I think that WWE is just it always made me question, if these guys are making a name for themselves on the indies without having the WWE machine behind them, why would the WWE not want to sign these guys and see what they can do behind their advertising and their network and DVDs and Monday Night Raw and pay-per-views? What could a CM Punk or a Daniel Bryan or Seth Rollins or a Kevin Owens, what could these guys really do on the big stage? And I think we're seeing it. I mean, Punk did amazing. Daniel Bryan was super over. Seth Rollins was one of my favorite heels for a long time. Mm-hmm. And Kevin Owens is right there. So I just think this is a trend that we're going to continue to see, because, I mean, especially with the Cruiserweight Classic also, there's tons of indie guys there. And they're very popular. And, like when on NXT, when these guys, they show up on NXT for like a surprise or something, the Full Sail building just goes crazy when they come out. So I definitely think, in the words of Drake Younger, the cream always rises to the top. So, I mean, I just think you're seeing the WWE and Triple H really invest a lot of time with the indie guys, because they've been trained. They've been doing this, like you said. Kevin Owens has been doing this for years. There's not been any place that he has not gotten over. So why can't he not make himself and the WWE lots of money?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I was scrolling through Facebook a couple days ago, and somebody had shared a meme that had Owens, Ambrose, and Nakamura with their titles, and they said if 1 year ago you had said Ambrose is going to be Raw SmackDown's champion, Kevin's going to be Raw's champion, and Shinsuke is going to be the NXT champion, what would you have said? It's really interesting to see the direction that it's taking, for sure, because I think this has the potential to be another sort of boom period, because people are getting to WWE that have styles that if you just watch WWE, you've never quite seen before. And the people who already follow these guys are a lot more inclined to watch the product. People who have been like F Vince for like a decade are now turning into the product because it has so many guys that they like on it. So I think this has a real potential. That is, if they do it correctly and don't do the WWE thing and mess it up somehow, to be a really good part of the business.
Sure. And and another thing too is I understand too. I mean, WWE is a business, and of course you're still going to sign guys they're big or former football players. And I think when you sign like independent talent and you put them in NXT and you mix those former football players or just great athletes in with actual independent wrestlers who've been part of, been traveling the world on their own, I think that even helps them become better wrestlers.
Yeah.
So, it's a win-win all around.
Yeah, for sure. So I want to take this opportunity to dive a little bit into the story of Billy Rock. I guess let's start at the beginning. Where exactly does wrestling enter your life?
As a fan, around 7 years old, and then after when I got to high school, I kind of got away from wrestling. Not much. I would just kind of occasionally watch it. And at my high school, it just wasn't the cool thing, and there wasn't that many wrestling fans, so I kind of fell out of it. But then, like when high school was over, I got back into it, and around 1999, pretty far back for some, there used to be a magazine called Wow magazine. And this was like the internet was around, but like it's not as big as and easy to get a hold of like it is now.
Right.
Like back then, not everybody had a computer. Now everybody pretty much has a computer. But so there was a magazine called Wow magazine, and it was kind of a magazine that kind of broke kayfabe a little bit. It had gossip and stuff, and it's pretty cool. Well, there was an asshole Dory Funk Junior's wrestling school in Ocala, Florida. So I went ahead and I called them up, and I took my first wrestling training the last week of December of 2000. And that kind of got the ball rolling for me. And eventually I found Don Basher for WCWO. And then I trained with him for about 2 months, and then I was in the ring after that. And then I kind of just started my career after that.
Sounds good. So how do you find out about indie wrestling specifically? Because there are so many people, especially I would say at this time, who are even wrestling fans that don't understand that this, I don't want to say underground network, but that this system of feds are in place where people are putting on shows. And I remember talking to Gregory Iron, and he talked a little bit about figuring out that there was indie wrestling, more or less. So was that like a revelation for you at any point, or was that something that you were at least acutely aware of the whole time?
I've been aware of it the whole time. I think for me, like, it's funny because I think at like a very young age, like when I was like 7 and 8, my dad used to buy me PWI magazines, and I know there's some younger viewers out there, but PWI magazine used to be a big magazine. It really was very popular if you're a wrestling fan. And on the inside, and so where I grew up, it was nothing but WWF at the time on TV. But when I'd open up a PWI magazine, it would show me NWA, it would show me AWA, World Class, Puerto Rico, Japan. So I felt like even at a young age, I was kind of seeing wrestling was all over the world, not just WWF or WWE. And then so I just kind of followed that throughout the years. Then all of a sudden, PWI started adding in independence. And, like today's fans, they're big independent stars, maybe Johnny Gargano, Zack Sabre Jr., A.R. Fox. For me, it was Reckless Youth. It was a young Mike Quackenbush, Ace Darling. It was the East Coast wrestlers that were starting to get a lot of press from PWI magazine. And that's how I got introduced. There were several wrestlers at that time. Christopher Daniels was always in it too. And so I always was aware of it. And, and also, for me, I was also in the whole, ECW boom too. So I got to see as a fan the rise of ECW. And I remember that was kind of my, evolve, because it was something completely different than what WWE or WCW was putting on.
So, as far as indie wrestling is concerned, as WWE, it seems, is transitioning to, I don't want to say like a more indie style, but being more accepting of the indie style for sure, and having guys who work that style. How do you think that independent wrestling stays relevant and fresh? Because, at least for me, I've always wanted to go to indie shows because it was stuff that I couldn't find on WWE, and I feel like, because I tell people with Emerge all the time, I feel like a lot of the time we put on better shows than WWE, which I may be a little bit biased there. But how do you think indie wrestling keeps that edge as we move into this new generation?
Well, with indie wrestling, there's just no restrictions. WWE, they have to worry about sponsors, and they just got a lot of eyes on them. I mean, they're a publicly traded company, so there are some things they cannot do. But as on indie wrestling, it's, you are the most purest artist you can be. And I think that's what's so awesome about the indie wrestling, I don't think you'll ever see Joey Ryan do a stick flip on WWE TV, but if you go see him live at an independent wrestling show, you get to see that. Currently right now, I'm a big supporter of it. It's intergender wrestling with one of my students, Heidi Lovelace, who's wrestled guys all over the United States. And I don't know if you'll ever really see that being popular in WWE. If you like hardcore wrestling, you'll see that on the indies more than you'll see in the WWE. So, I mean, like I said, it's pro wrestling at its purest art form on the independent level.
Yeah, definitely, and I think with the intergender wrestling, like you said, that's something that sort of, once it got onto a more mainstay worldwide basis with Lucha Underground, where your not basic cable, but your deluxe cable package viewers are seeing this, and all the time it's like Matt Stryker saying, equal opportunity, we're going to keep doing this, and this is something that we find value in. So I think that is really important for indie wrestling because, like you said, there are no restrictions except for restrictions that at times a venue will put on you, but that's to be said with any venue. So you have had the opportunity over the course of your career to wrestle a lot of really interesting people. And I know I'm sort of asking a cliche question here, but who would be your most interesting opportunity to wrestle? Not necessarily even from a peer respect sort of thing, I guess, to where maybe somebody you looked up to.
That that's like still going today, or
Doesn't matter. Your whole career.
my whole career. And you're asking me like who I'd want to wrestle, basically.
No, somebody that you have worked with.
Oh, okay. You know, my first match with Mike Quackenbush is always going to have a special place in my heart because that was the match where I was able to showcase my British style of wrestling and my lucha style. And at that time, that was 2006, and the lucha moves and the British style wrestling wasn't being as kind of popular as it's getting to now. And so I really didn't have a lot of people to do that with. And so I had the opportunity to do it with Mike. And it wasn't just that, but it was just when the match was over, just some of the internet buzz I got from that match really helped my career. But, also my feud with John Moxley, who's now Dean Ambrose for IPW, that was pretty awesome too. That was us telling a story for 6 months of us challenging each other for the Mid-American title. And then it finally ended in a 30-minute falls count anywhere, no disqualification, no count-outs match. It was in 30-minute Ironman. And I remember when we announced that match, like I literally heard a fan in the crowd go, "Oh," like they didn't want us to go 30 minutes. And then I remember the promoter was kind of like, "I'm not sure if you guys can hold this crowd for 30 minutes." And we did, and it was an awesome feeling, knowing that for 30 minutes that crowd was, they were eating out of the palm of our hands, and that's a proud moment when you're an artist and people actually care about your artwork.
Yeah, no, and I think wrestling as an art is an incredibly important thing to me. Actually, in one of my classes at school today, we were doing a sort of if your life was a book, draw the cover thing, and I drew myself in a Chris Caliber shirt, and I'm wearing the shirt of Cole Radrick, both emerged talents, and I described it to the class as, because I try to, support my brothers, and it's like, if you care about, because everybody's always like, support indie music, support all of these independent artists who are just out there doing what they love and not making much money off of it. Independent wrestlers are the same way. A lot of times people take losses to go to shows just to get experience, get their name out there, and most importantly, do what they love. I feel like the industry as a whole has lost sight of wrestling as an art form in some ways, because I always describe it as performance theater. It's incredibly important to me to retain the art form of wrestling. What is the one thing that does that for you, in that this is the thing that the industry has lost that we need to retain? Or not even lost, Mitt?
That's a good question. You've got me on that one, because so like for me, I know a lot of veterans will say, I do think some of the matches, some of the wrestlers need to make sure that one of the big ones for me that is selling, but what's big for me is if somebody's putting a lot of a beat down on somebody's leg or arm or their back, and then later in the match that I see this a lot, that wrestler will forget that body part was worked on or was beat up on, and that drives me nuts. So like that's part of the art form that we're trying to show the audience, and I was just telling my class this the other day, when somebody's beating me up, somebody's hurting my arm, I want to make sure that the crowd acknowledges that, Billy Roc may not be able to hit his move because his opponent keyed on his body part that helps him do that move. And so I think that's one of the things. I mean, I will admit this. I'm kind of one of the veterans that I'm very open to how wrestling's evolving. I've always was told that if you don't evolve with the business, you're going to get left behind.
Correct.
So, like with the Young Bucks throwing like a billion super kicks, or Joey Ryan doing his dick flip, or intergender wrestling, like none of that really bothers me. And for one, the way that the Bucks use the super kicks, I mean, if you watch their match, they're phenomenal to me. Joey Ryan's a comedy wrestler. When he does the dick flip, it's hilarious. And if you do it right, intergender wrestling can be very competitive and believable. And I think that's where I'm kind of different than some of the other people that I've wrestled with.
I think the key is storytelling. I mean, it's what it all comes down to. I mean, people talk about spots, and it all comes down to psychology. One of the Emerge
Absolutely.
wrestlers was talking to me a few weeks ago, probably, and he was talking about spots and the spottiness of the business. And what I ended up saying was, I don't care what your finish is. I don't care how many flips you do in the course of your finish. I don't care what the spot is, as long as you tell me the story and it makes sense in the context of the match.
He's absolutely right, and like that, and like I was just a wrestler just asked me the other day about my psychology, and because what he brought up was, he's like, you do a lot of creative spots, but your storytelling is it's on point, and that's I've always been. I still hold that to high regard as my believability and storytelling. But at the same time, I still believe that pro wrestling has evolved more into just, let me shoot somebody off and call it clothesline. Because to me, that's boring.
Yeah.
So I try to make things a little bit more exciting while still being in the content of the believability and the psychology of my match. And I guarantee you, there's an opponent that I've worked that will tell you that I've just went out there and was a complete spot monkey. I start my matches out with, okay, what's the story of the match? Okay, that's our story. Now let's put it together. Let's add some creative spots here. Let's add some cool moves here, and let's get these fans really into the match. Because I feel like that's one of the things I do. I feel like pro wrestling has the fans are demanding more of us to not do some boring stuff. And just like Gregory Irons said, though, I mean, I've seen some matches. I was telling my students this too. Back in the day, Ric Flair and Ricky Steamboat used to always do walk and talk matches. They didn't know anything except for the finish, and those matches were phenomenal. But then again, Ricky Steamboat wrestled Randy Savage, where they talked about every single little bit of every little bitty move they were going to do in the match, and that match was phenomenal.
Yeah, Savage was like anal about knowing every single move of his matches, and from what I understand, if one thing went wrong, he would pretty much go mental because he needed it to be set out. Just the way his brain
and
worked.
You know what? That just means what that means is, and I know a lot of people they complain about spot monkeys and stuff, but in Savage's case, that means he gave a shit about what he was doing for the crowd. I mean, he was doing it for himself too, obviously, but he cared about so much what the crowd wanted to see, and that the crowd got their money's worth. He was a perfectionist, and to me, there's nothing wrong with that. I can wrestle, walk, and talk, and but I prefer to do some talking. I prefer to because I care about my match, and if I walk and talk, I don't feel like I can give the crowd everything that I can do. I can still give them a decent match, but I don't feel like I can give them my best. And so, when people, if there's veterans out there that do complain that maybe I do talk too much before a match, well, it's because I care. And I mean, the bottom line is I care about my performance, and the crowd who pays $10, $15, $20 or more, that they're getting the best out of Billy Rock.
An artist executing his vision, back to the whole art thing. And to me, we talked a little bit about the different styles of wrestling and the way that the whole thing shakes out. And to me, the way I always think of it is there are two comparisons that I make, which essentially are the same comparison, but it just depends on what you like more, which is rock music and horror movies. Because as this genre started out, a lot of people were doing a lot of the same things, and they were finding different ways to tell stories the same way. Let's say, because I'm a broadcasting guy, so with horror movies, you had your formula, and for years and years, the formula worked with horror movies. And then you get artists and directors and actors here and there that start to branch off just a little bit in certain directions. We do this with the cinematography. We show this shot instead of this shot. We tell our story this way. We put the twist here instead of here. And then the next thing you know, there is a family tree effect where all of these genres of horror now exist. You have the Saw kind of stuff. You have the, you know, all the different types of horror movies, and I think it's the same way with rock music, where it started off fairly centralized with differences, and now there are as many little subgenres of rock as there are grains of sand on a beach. I think wrestling is the same way, where it all comes from essentially the same root that was being put forth right around the end of the 70s and 80s, and there was variation there, but then you have people who do this spot over here, tell their story in their match this way, decide to actually incorporate some comedy here, and now we have this beautiful tapestry of all the different styles of wrestling, and not all of it is for everybody, and that's okay. But we have all of these different artists creating what they believe is their art and what their passion is.
Absolutely, that's absolutely right. And like for me, when I put on when we do the Arena Champions shows, my goal is to have a little bit of everything on every show. So like our last show, the opener was myself and 5 other wrestlers, and it was for the Billy Rock Challenge. But I mean, the match it started out with a little bit of comedy, and it was just kind of it turned out to be like a Fast and the Furious type movie, because it was just, I mean, there's 6 of us, so it was constant action was going on, and that's okay. And the story was being told, but it was going at a faster pace.
Right.
The next match was Josh Crane and Sage Phillips, and it was a little bit slower of a match. It was more hard hitting. Then later on the match, we had Sean Cook versus Rob Conway, which was like our Memphis style wrestling match. Later on, we had Shigeru Iri and Dale Patrick's, which put on just an absolute classic for us. I mean, that was just Japanese strong style there, and it was great. Then you had, like, in the main event then you had Heidi Lovelace and Percy Davis, which was just a straight up fight. And then you had a lucha match between DJ Z from TNA and Trip Cassidy. I mean, I try to incorporate every single style you can think of into my shows, because I want to make it exciting and fun for everybody, and I don't want to have the same. A wrestling show shouldn't have every single match a Japanese strong style match every match. Not every match should have 20 kickouts of finishing moves, right? I mean, It should that whole show should build up to the main event gets that perk. Everybody else needs to kind of feed around it, and you can do it, and you can be entertaining, and you can still put on great matches.
Yeah, and when you look at the shows that are hailed as some of the greatest wrestling events of all time, you see that there is a mix of styles that was enough to keep the audience entertained. My mind immediately jumps to WrestleMania 17, where it starts off with this pretty technical match between Regal and Jericho, and then you start going down the line, and there's like a squash 6-man with the Right to Censor versus the APA and Taz. You have your TLC 2. You have McMahon versus McMahon. Then later on you have Triple H and Undertaker, and you have Rock, Austin, and I think Eddie Guerrero and Test for the European Championship. And all of those matches, and the one I missed more specifically was Benoit Angle, where you had everything from a TLC match with some of the most memorable spots in history, and Benoit and Angle, who essentially replicated a shoot wrestling match with a little bit of brawling there for about 15 minutes, and both of them got standing ovations from the crowd because when you again, back to the storytelling, when you present a good story, that is how you hook your crowd, no matter what the story you're telling is, how outlandish it is, if you make them believe it. And that's what I think a lot of guys today need to do with just causing the audience to suspend their disbelief. I feel like to a certain extent that is a lost art. I think a lot of people are coming at it from the wrong perspective. That's just my opinion.
Yeah, I don't completely disagree with that. I mean, the audience, I would think in this day and age, not all of them, because I know there's some people in Lafayette that what we do is still the real deal, and that's awesome. That's awesome. But there are, there's a lot of people now, the business, in my opinion, it's been exposed. And, the internet, to me, if you want to know anything about pro wrestling, just Google it because
Right.
it's there. And there's some fans that probably know more terminology than I'll ever know. And but they're there for a reason. And as long as you're not insulting their intelligence, as long as you're entertaining them, they can get by with some of the stuff we do.
Yeah.
And but I think it's up to us. Once again, it goes back to the storytelling, making sure what we do in that ring, it all makes sense. There's a right place and a wrong place to do comedy. And that's the other thing. I think there's certain wrestlers that can do comedy great. Colt Cabana, that's his shtick. He does an amazing job with it. And then I think when some wrestlers try to break out the comedy, especially independent wrestlers that aren't really known, sometimes it comes off as a dud.
Right.
And, it's them practicing their craft, and I get it, and I hope they learn from it sometimes. But there's just, like I said, there's a right place and a wrong place for really anything.
Yeah, absolutely. So as your career progresses, at what point do you get to the place where you want to teach the next generation and pay it forward? And by the way, before you even respond to that question, I just want to say, and I've been telling everybody that I've been telling I was going to interview you, I've mentioned he owns and operates the School of Roc, and I hate him because he got the good name. That that's just like, oh, that's so good. But at what point did that happen for you?
In 2009 was like one of my and I don't use the word retirement when I say wrestling because I don't make a living from wrestling.
Right.
I have a full-time job for that. But the first time I left wrestling was in 2009, January of 2009. My daughter was born 3 months prior. My dad had died 2 weeks prior to my last match, and he'd been battling cancer for about 6 months. So, I was just drained mentally on real life stuff. And it was, at that time, I needed at least a break. I thought it was me saying goodbye, but I did eventually come back. But in that time, Trip Cassidy had, this is how old I am and how old the school, I can't believe it's been around for 7 years. But MySpace was still relevant then. So that's what I had. And so Trip Cassidy messaged me on MySpace, and he kept hounding me about getting the school going. And then I remembered some advice that Greg Carey from IPW gave me, and he's like, you don't really need you need a building and a ring, but why don't you just rent it from somebody who already has a building and a ring? And so that light bulb went off in my head, so I contacted Brian Roberts, who was running a wrestling promotion in Lafayette called BMF, and I said, hey, I got some guys that want to be trained. Do you mind if I can hold a class here. And so he did it, and he was awesome about it. In fact, and I'm glad he didn't. But he didn't even charge me that first year. I'm glad he didn't, because it turned out to only be 2 students. So I wouldn't have been able to help out at all anyway.
Right.
But if I was to ever have I definitely think the success of School of Roc was pretty much because I had Trip Cassidy as my first student. If I had somebody else, I don't know if it would have been as successful as it could have been. And I say that because Trip got it. Even though he was only 16, 17 years old, he got it. And when I mean he got it, he understood what to do and not to do. He had difficulties learning some of the moves, just like all of us did when we first started out. But I mean, he just understood the business right away, and I didn't have to get on him for being a fanboy. I didn't have to get on him for some of the other little things of pro wrestling that drive me nuts. And he just got it. So when he graduated, here I am telling a 17-year-old kid, I'm like, all right, so after this, from now on, when these classes graduate, you're the guy that's going to have to lead them out and point them in the right direction. I said, I can, but I don't wrestle. I only wrestled for IPW at this time. So I said, I don't know these other places. You're going to have to be the one. So here I am trusting a 17-year-old kid into being the leader of the School of Roc. And it took some time, but we eventually got there. And classes just started getting bigger, and the students, the bigger the classes were, the more better the students started becoming, and it just kind of grew from there.
Yeah, so what is, and there may not be one thing per se that you can put your finger on, but is there something that the one thing you look for in a student where you say, I believe he's going to be a success? Is there one selling point that you find that sort of wins you over when you're seeing these young green guys come in and try to learn the business?
Yeah, it's definitely it's how respectful they are, but it's all that's part of it. The other part of it, though, is also they're respectful, and they're not. Whatever I say, they get it. And so what I mean that is to bring up my fanboy comment that I made. There's been many times where I've told guys, okay, when you come to the training school, it is a safe place. But some of the comments that you make where they constantly talk about what happened on Monday Night Raw or what happened on the pay-per-view, I said if you did that in the locker room, you could be criticized as a fanboy.
Right.
And some of them get it, some of them don't. And the ones that get it, they're business oriented. They understand that this is a business. And my students that have done well, that's what they've done. They've understand it's a business. They understand that they shouldn't be fanboys. They understand that they've got to learn as much wrestling as they possibly can. And those are the ones that usually succeed. And oftentimes, those are the ones, like I said, those are the ones that succeed. I was going to go on to something else, but basically those are the ones that they just get it. And those are the ones that will go on and they'll get better opportunities than others.
So, your choice of two questions. What was your first, or what is your most proud, quote unquote, proud papa moment with one of your students? And I know there has to be so many, but as you some of the people that you have trained are making a splash on the indie scene. And so what was one of those moments when you start breathing a little heavier and your chest swells up with pride because you're so proud of somebody who came to you essentially with nothing but a love for the business?
Yeah, you're right. That's a hard one because there's a lot of them. I know that the first time I got an email from Dave Prazak asking about Heidi Lovelace for Shimmer, that was one of those moments. I could give you a long list of Heidi Lovelace moments, really. From her doing Japan, Ring of Honor,
Of course.
whatnot. But like, one of my proud moments, and it does involve Heidi, but it also involves Trish Cassidy, was for Wrestling is Hard. I was watching. They had a tournament for our championship, which was called the Idolo Cup, and they put on this match. And mind you, Heidi had only been wrestling for me for a year. Trip Cassidy, like 3 years. And they put on this match in front of, Wrestling is Hard, in front of their diehards. And they just tore the house down. And that's when that moment when I'm like, these kids are good, and they just made me so proud. And whenever those two wrestle each other, they're phenomenal matches. And I just get so proud when those two are in the ring and they're doing their thing and they're just killing it. It's awesome. And those are some of the things. There's a lot. I mean, Percy Davis right now is making me so proud of what he's doing right now. I can't teach charisma, and he's got charisma.
Absolutely.
But I taught him, I showed him the ropes, but he's making me real proud. Remy Wilkins has done some great things, and he's really stepped up and became his own man, and I'm proud of him. And Luke Lawson and Mance Warner and Sage Phillips, they just were from my last class, so they haven't even been wrestling for a year, and I see their names everywhere. It's because they understand about paying their dues, and they go out there and they do it, and that's all I ask of them. So, I mean, there's a long list of proud Papa moments I have for these students.
So you touched on Mance Warner. What was he like that when he came to you? Because I always tell people, like, if you are not Mance Warner's friend on Facebook or you do not follow Mance Warner on Twitter, oh, what an entertainment you are missing. Because this guy is messed up. And speaking as somebody who has seen him in the locker room too, it's not really an act. Like, he's a special human being.
Well, it's funny because when he was training with me, I could see the passion in his eyes, and he wasn't like what he is now on Twitter and Facebook, which it's like you just said. If you are not friends with him on Twitter, or you're not following him, or if you're not friends with him on Facebook, you're not following him on Twitter, please do, because the stuff he's doing is absolutely hilarious. And him and I were just talking the other night about some things, and I told him, I'm like, just keep doing what you're doing, because if I'm loving it,
yeah,
and I'm 40 years old, and you're cracking me up with some of the stuff you're saying, just keep doing what you're doing.
It's the talk of a merge, too, behind the scenes. Like, we would show up at DSI Gym to start setting up for a show, and it's like, so did you see what Mance posted last night? Oh, yeah, that thing about him tearing it up at the 1998 WCW Nitro taping, and then DMs. Yeah, I remember that. Like,
yes. Yeah, he's once again, when I look at my last well, I'll be honest with you, in March when I gave my locker room speech in front of my students, and I was kind of letting them know about us closing the school down, I'm looking at my students, and to me it's a who's who in there, and and Mance was definitely one of them that popped up, and I'm thinking, I'm like, okay, this person's done awesome, this person's done awesome, this person's done awesome. There's Mance Warner, he's doing awesome. So I'm really proud of what he's doing.
Yeah, absolutely. So you touched on it, and here with not too much time left in the episode, I want to talk a little bit about what has brought you to this decision to close down, as you mentioned, and November 6th, if I remember correctly, will be what is your last match. I believe you're taking on Tripp, right?
Correct. Well, I mean, if anybody's friends with me on Facebook, it's not a secret. My wife and I we're about to get a divorce. We went through a lot of personal issues, and a lot of it came down to wrestling. And so basically, just to be raw and real, in one of our arguments, she brought up the fact that, this year, and November 14th, actually, I turned 40 years old. And so she kind of, with her saying that, it kind of hit me hard, like, she's right. I'm not young anymore. So wrestling-wise, and, I mean, my last few matches, they've not been what I'm really proud of. And it's because I'm not in shape like I used to be. My hips bad, my lower back is bad. Just the other day I was standing and I could literally feel my left shoulder like falling out of place. Like I had to like pull it back into place because it slips out every once in a while. My neck is bad, my knees are bad, and so my heart feels like I'm 25, just starting in wrestling, but in reality I'm 40 and I'm old and I'm getting beat up. And so wrestling-wise, that's why I'm ending. The school part of it is also the same. The school, it takes up 4 hours. Actually, it's more because I usually get there about an hour early, and I usually stay about 30 minutes to an hour later. So it takes up around 4 to 6 hours every Sunday. And so that's time away from my family. And right now, it's as much as I love pro wrestling, my family is important. And so my wife and I have reconciled, and we're still married, and we're still taking care of my daughter. And so that was the decision. It's just my real life family is more important than pro wrestling, and I've had so many more experiences than what I ever thought that this 7-year-old kid that grew up in the gravel roads of Lafayette, Indiana would ever have. So don't feel sorry for me for that. I couldn't be more proud of what I've done. So that's what kind of brings us to this point. It's time for me to spend time. My daughter found out this year she's a heck of a softball player, so it's time for me to start concentrating on her and making sure she's getting all of the full support from Daddy as she needs. And then so we made a decision that this should be the last year, and November 6th it's the last show. It will be me and Tripp Cassidy in the main event. The very first student of the School of Roc versus the patriarch of the School of Roc is what we're calling it. And we've got some surprises for that match as far as ways of entrance and stuff. So I'm excited about that. And then I'm also on the card, Heidi Lovelace versus Percy Davis in an I Quit Respect match. So not only does the loser say they have to say I quit, they also have to shake the winner's hand, just like Ric Flair versus Terry Funk back in Clash of the Champions. So we're excited about that match. And so since I'm, we've got those two net matches announced, and so since I'm on this podcast, and I feel like I should unveil something. The show is 95% School of Roc students. But there's going to be one non-School of Roc student, and that will be independent sensation Eric Cannon. He will be on the show.
Man.
Yeah, and he will be taking on Sage Phillips that night.
Wow.
So we're excited to see Sage in that kind of performance. I feel like Eric is right up his alley. It's his kind of style of wrestling, and I'm pretty sure those two are going to tear it up. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And on a personal note, I hope to God I'm able to make it that night. Because I definitely want to come up and see that, especially now. But, I mean, I think your reasoning is something that everybody would have to respect. And recently, Emerge was in that situation as well where, Dave had some things to take care of at home. And there comes a point when I play gospel music when I'm not doing wrestling stuff. And one of the legends of our industry, a guy by the name of Jake Hess, said if the lights are shining brighter on stage than they are at home, it's time to get off the stage. And so I think anybody would understand and respect that situation. That being said, as you mentioned, your body is not what it could be, and granted, a good portion of that is from 17 years in the business. But as you sort of make your exit, and I know you've instilled this probably in all of your guys, but what is the number one thing you can say to somebody starting out? The one thing that if you could put it on a Post-it note to look at before every match for your entire career, in the way of taking care of yourself and the longevity of a career, or really, I mean, I guess anything at all, what would be the one thing that you would say to any of the young guys hearing this?
Yeah, I'm trying to come with something philosophical, but it's not going to probably happen. So, I mean, something I would tell the young guys, like, especially if it's just that one little thing before they go out on stage and perform their art and their craft, is take this business serious. I think that's one of my biggest pet peeves in wrestling is throughout the years, and I've been in locker rooms and I've sat around. Here I am, I'm about ready to throw up for my performance and my match, and there's only like 25 people out there, maybe there's 50, and it's because I cared that much about what I was doing. And even though it was only 25 or 50 people, I wanted those 25 or 50 people to be completely entertained by what I was doing. And I would see veterans talk and brag about, well, let's see if we can, like, not bump on this match. And not that there's anything wrong with that, because sometimes if you tell the story great, fine, you don't need to bump. And I get that. But they weren't doing it because it was part of a story. They were doing it because they were lazy. And that's what bothered me so much. It's like these people are paying money to see us bust our butts and give them the best matches possible. With that being said, to the young guys, don't kill yourselves if it's not needed. If a match is being taped, and it's only being, even if it's taped and it's going to go on YouTube, and maybe that YouTube video only gets 100 views, maybe falling off the top of a 30-foot scaffold is not the greatest idea ever. If you're going to do something silly, make sure that it's in front of a lot of people and you're doing it for the right reasons. I see a lot of people do stupid stuff, and it's not the right time. Save that for the bigger shows. You can still put on a great performance. You can still get your character over. You don't need to do something that's going to permanently, potentially hurt you in the long run physically. Because I know, and my style wasn't even that dangerous, and I'm beat up. So imagine somebody who puts on a dangerous style of wrestling and does falls from everywhere and high places. your body's going to get beat up. And there's mornings when I wake up and I can't believe my body does not move like it did 15 years ago. But that's the main thing. Love this business and care about it. Care about your performance. That's the big thing. Because if you're not caring about it, those fans won't care about it. And here's the other thing too. If it's your hometown and you're not caring about your performance and they're cheering you and you think you're doing a good thing, you're probably not doing a good thing. Always give your best. And that's just it. Just always do your best. Actually care about the product.
So one last time before we wrap up here, I want you to put on your promoter's cap and give us your best pitch for November 6th. And I can tell you as a fan, I am already sold, to say the least, and I think everybody else is too after listening to this episode. But remind us again of everything that we need to know for November 6th.
Sure. The show, it's Reign of Champions presents For Those About to Rock, ROC.
Again, you just get the best
6th.
names. Like,
we're going to have it November 6th, Lafayette, Indiana, at the Lafayette Theater. Doors open at 3, bell time is at 4. Tickets are $10 in advance, which if you go to the Lafayette Theater's website, you can order your tickets in advance if you live outside of Lafayette. They're $12 at the door. But on that night, you're gonna get actually 9 matches. I don't like to do pre-show matches, but I'm actually gonna have my first pre-show match, and then you're gonna have
what a time to do it!
Yeah, and we're gonna have 8 big matches, and 3 of the matches have been announced. As I just announced, you will see independent sensation Eric Cannon. He's done pretty much everything in wrestling. He will be facing a student who will be celebrating his first year in wrestling, Sage Phillips. I'm excited about that matchup. For the Idol Cup, you're going to see the champion Percy Davis, who's undefeated so far in our Arena of Champions TV tapings. He's undefeated, and secondly, he's undefeated even on our shows. He will be facing the challenger Heidi Lovelace in an I Quit respect match. So the loser will have to say I quit. When the loser loses, they will also have to shake the winner's hand and tell them that they respect them. These two have been brawling and feuding and fighting and yelling at each other for the last 7 or 8 months. So it'll be interesting how that plays out. And then in the main event, you will see one last time the last match of the School of Roc, the last match of Ring of Champions. School of Roc students, everybody will say goodbye as Trick Cassidy, the Blue-Eyed Devil, the very first student of the School of Roc, will take on the patriarch of the School of Roc, myself, Billy Rock. And I can say that in Tripp's career, we have wrestled each other probably about 12 times, and he has beaten me 11 of those times. So I'm out to make sure that my last match, the last moment of School of Roc, is me beating him. So, but the night is going to be full of relishing in our 7 years of the School of Roc, and we're going to share a lot of memories that night. And I hope to see a lot of people out there just to support what we have done for 7 years. And it mean a lot for some fans that I haven't seen in a long time to be there. So I'm looking forward to that night, and I know it's going to be a fun one.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I said, as a fan, I'm sold. I hope to make it out myself. Billy, thank you so much for joining me. It has been an absolute pleasure. What I'll do here is I'll go ahead and I'll wrap up the episode. You stay on the line for a minute, and then we'll wrap up. All right? Thanks for being on.
Okay.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for listening to this episode. I love all of my listeners, and I cannot wait to share even more with you. We have got so many names of people that we have lined up for this show, and it all started with Billy Roc today. We cannot wait to give you everything. Of course, this is the Emerge Wrestling Podcast Network. You can find us on iTunes, on SoundCloud. Catch us, emergewrestling.com, youtube.com/emergeprowrestling, and, of course, our Facebook page. We thank you so much for listening. We cannot wait to see you next time. And until next time, I'm your host, Casey Johnson. Now go brighten someone's day.